Okay, I couldn't resist it. I'm going to put out 2 My Life in Objects videos this week that feature Magic the Gathering books. Seeing as I'd mentioned in the previous episode about this book, which is the advanced version of the official strategy guide, so this is the advanced strategy guide. This one has been put together by Mark Justice with Tim Dedopulos, I think that is. Sorry about mangling the name there. And of course, not surprisingly, we can tell by its title, this is a more advanced guide for expert Magic players. And this came out a year later from the one I looked at in the previous video, the official strategy guide. This one came out in 98, and also as a consequence features, the next sets in Magic, but also it doesn't just concern itself with 5th edition, because it starts to get much more specific as well in terms of the decks it's talking about. So yeah, it's featuring whatever sets were available at that time in standard, I suppose. So it goes through the evolution of the Magic environment. And what's interesting about this book is it's, along with the Duelist, it's a nice way of documenting tournament decks at that time. And so you can see that's exactly what it does. It goes through some tournament decks, it goes through some current decks from 1998 or 97 into 98. And so it talks about mono red, and of course for each one it goes through the history of the deck. So mono red, just starting off with the Sly deck, and then describes a little bit about how the deck plays, what the weaknesses are. And so it's looking at main archetypes, meta at the time. And so we get Necropotence, White Weenie, Blue-White Control. Again, they're all going through the history, those sort of things. And then there's quite a big section here, I think, about principles of deck construction. So it goes through, and again, it's doing this rather neatly against a backdrop of a deck list as well. So yeah, it's nice to how it sort of gives a real life illustration in terms of a deck that shows how that particular thing that's being talked about, so what did they call it? They're the principles, how they're actually the principles applied in practice. So you can see it's all numbered here. Then it goes through various colours as well, because it's talking about don't be vulnerable to artifacts enchantment. So it's looking at how in some instances the various colours of Magic might deal with whatever it's talking about, if it's like a threat issue. So it's a bit about mid-game, be prepared for whatever gives your deck problems. So you can see it's quite a large section, a bit about practicing, knowing the environment. And then we've got some, on top of the things it discusses in the principles from a practical perspective, it also has a practical application section here. So it goes into that in further detail. There's a nice section on card evaluation as well, so for when a new set. The idea is that it's trying to encourage you to evaluate cards when new sets come out, but what it does do is it sort of goes through the current meta, if you like, in terms of the sets. So you can see we've got evaluating what is available. So it's talking about type 2 here, so that would be standard as it was at the time. So 5th edition Tempest, Mirage, Visions and Weatherlight. So the Visions, Mirage, Weatherlight, 5th edition Tempest, and then it starts to go through the process of evaluation. So it's looking at say, a particular meta for a particular format, and going through saying what's available, and doing an evaluation of that as a whole thing, beyond just actually, I did mention about new sets coming out, but it is actually much wider evaluation than that. So you can see it's getting down in the roots here for individual cards, which is quite useful. It goes through, and of course you could extrapolate this into modern equivalents, I suppose. Then there's a nice summary at the end there, general principles when evaluating cards. Then we've got strategies for sealed decks. So here that might be, say, where you're taking a pack of 6 boosters, and it goes into the format at the time. Down here, about building the deck. There we go. Talks about selecting creature removal. If you're familiar with bread, then you'll see parallels here with that. Talks about a couple of decks. Then it's talking about draft tournament, and it talks about booster draft. So yeah, here at that point, booster draft was definitely popular. It does talk about Rochester draft as well. So it's saying there's 2 main types of tournament draft formats, booster and Rochester. And I think, and again, someone can correct me if I've got this wrong, Rochester was the first one, and then booster draft. People started doing that, and that became the more popular of the two. So it does explain Rochester draft. I mean, there's other drafting strategies beyond that, or drafting formats, but they were the 2 ones at the time, and by now booster had got popular. Building the deck, metagame and tournament environment. So talking a little bit again about environments. Ethics, sealed deck, booster draft, deck registration, and then we get a summary, and there's some nice graphs, if you like graphs, about mana curves and the probability of drawing stuff. Then we've got a little section at the back about popular tournament decks. And nice decks. I always like pouring through old deck lists, and it's quite fun to just put the decks. I like putting the decks together in Archidect, and of course most of these you can find online in text format, so they're fairly easy to import. I say most of these, quite a few of these. But it's quite fun to do that and actually see what I really like the way decks look. There's something about the aesthetic of magic cards on a table. I don't know what it is, but that's why I've always been attracted to magic, is more that how the cards just look when they sort of sit in that board format. Yeah. There's a bit about extended, which was still a thing then. And then a nice simple index and an advert for the dual list there. So hopefully you enjoyed that. So another, this one's actually not in bad condition. I did buy it second hand, and around the same time as I bought the official strategy guide. So hopefully you enjoyed that flick through. I'm sure these can be still tracked down somewhere. At the time, these were relatively cheap to get hold of. I don't know what they're like now. But anyway, thanks once again. Bye for now, and I will catch you in a future video.